The towering 8-foot alien queen had once scoffed at the very notion of reproducing with a human, until the unthinkable happened. Frigid winds howled across the strange, icy terrain, carrying razor-sharp ice particles that lashed against Commander Watson's failing shuttle. His hands clenched around the manual controls as he wrestled against the ship's erratic descent. The vessel groaned under the immense pressure of atmospheric entry, its structure barely holding together. One by one, the onboard systems flickered out, the alien interference wreaking havoc on every piece of electronic equipment. "Come on, you piece of junk," he snarled, his muscles straining against the control yoke. He just needed a few more seconds. The ground surged toward him, a sprawling expanse of white, punctuated by eerie, dark silhouettes of alien vegetation. The shuttle's last functional engine sputtered before cutting out completely, plunging the cabin into an unsettling silence, save for the whispering wind seeping through the ship's fractured hull. Then came the impact. The force of the crash slammed Will against his restraints, knocking the breath from his lungs. When the world finally stopped spinning, he realized he was hanging upside down, blood trickling from a gash just above his eyebrow. The cockpit window was cracked but miraculously intact, offering an uncomfortably close view of the snow-covered ground, mere inches from his face. With a grunt, he released his harness, dropping onto what had once been the ceiling. "Well," he muttered, brushing the blood away. "That could have gone better." A quick survey of his supplies revealed that most of his emergency gear had survived the crash, including his powered armor. The sleek, black combat suit, an engineering marvel, was designed to keep him alive in extreme conditions, though its energy reserves wouldn't last indefinitely. He donned the suit, opting to leave the helmet off for now to conserve power, and pushed his way out of the wreckage. The cold was brutal. Snow rose to his knees, and the wind sliced through his short blonde hair like frozen razors. His tactical display confirmed what his body already knew. Temperatures were plummeting to a lethal -40°C. "Mayday, mayday," he called out on all available frequencies, his voice firm but urgent. "Commander Watson of the ESS Hyperion. Does anyone copy?" Silence. Just static. Then, a flicker of movement at the edge of his vision. A streak of orange against the endless white. Instinct kicked in, and his hand shot to his pulse rifle as he spun around. But there was nothing. Just the ghostly sway of alien trees, shifting with the wind. He exhaled sharply. He needed shelter. Fast. The shuttle's power cells were fried, and the backup system wouldn't last more than a few days in these brutal conditions. His scanner detected a large geological formation roughly 2 kilometers north. It might offer some protection from the elements. With no better options, he started trudging through the snow. But that eerie sensation lingered, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. Years of combat training kept his senses razor-sharp, his body on high alert. But even as his boots crunched through the snow, part of his mind drifted to the events that had led him here. The Hyperion had been conducting routine scans of this sector when they detected an anomaly, an energy signature unlike anything on record. Standard protocol dictated that they log the findings for future study. If only they had. Humanity's relentless expansion into the stars had been fueled by an almost reckless ambition, pushing forward at breakneck speed, no matter the risks. The sharp crack of ice breaking behind him sent a jolt of adrenaline through Will's veins. He spun around, rifle raised, every muscle tense. This time, it wasn't just his imagination. Standing before him was the most breathtakingly alien being he had ever seen. She was colossal, easily 8 feet tall, with skin that shimmered in hues of deep orange and gold, like the last moments of a dying sun. Her hair, long and fluid as molten copper, cascaded over her shoulders, moving subtly in the wind. Her armor, if it could even be called that, clung to her like interlocking plates of organic metal, formed from overlapping scales that covered just enough to be considered modest, while still exuding an undeniable air of warrior-like authority. In her hands, she wielded a weapon that was part spear, part plasma rifle, its lethal edge directed straight at his chest. "Well, hello there," Will said, keeping his rifle steady but purposefully aimed away from her. "Any chance you're up for a friendly conversation?" Her golden, feline-like eyes narrowed, assessing him with an intensity that sent a prickle down his spine. When she spoke, her voice was a rich, resonant melody, and to his surprise, his universal translator processed it seamlessly. "You are either very brave or very foolish to trespass into the sovereign domain of the Solarian Empire, human," she declared. Will forced a disarming smile. "Would you believe me if I said I'm just lost?" He gave a slight bow, adopting a light-hearted charm. "Commander Will Watson, at your service." "And you are?" "I am Queen Olia of the Solarian Empire," she stated, her piercing gaze sweeping over him with scrutiny. "And you," she added after a beat, "are my prisoner." Will kept his easygoing smirk in place, but his mind was already working through possible escape routes. "Your Majesty, I appreciate the warm welcome," he quipped, "but I usually prefer to have dinner first before getting taken captive." A sound escaped her then, something between a scoff and a laugh. "You joke in the face of capture. Typical human arrogance." "Not arrogance, just proper manners," he replied smoothly. "Besides, technically, you haven't captured me yet." His armor's onboard systems were already analyzing her weapon, assessing threat levels and response options. "Though I'll admit, the company's a lot more interesting than I expected when I crashed here." Olia's weapon remained steady, but there was a flicker of amusement in her expression. "You believe you can charm your way out of this situation?" she mused. "I've heard tales of human males and their tendencies. Did you expect to find a docile alien woman eager to rescue you?" "Honestly, right now, I'm just hoping to find shelter before I freeze to death," he admitted. His lips curled slightly. The company of a striking alien queen is just a bonus. A powerful gust of wind lashed between them, stirring a fresh wave of snow. Will noticed the slightest shudder run through her despite her composed exterior. Even she wasn't immune to the growing storm. "This weather's getting worse," he pointed out. "Maybe we should continue this little standoff somewhere warmer?" "You dare to suggest such a thing?" Her voice was a mix of indignation and intrigue. "Wouldn't dream of it, Your Majesty," he said with feigned innocence. "I'm just saying that we'd both be better off dealing with this indoors." She studied him for a long moment before finally conceding. "Your suggestion has merit. My outpost is not far from here. You will accompany me as my prisoner." Will exhaled, feigning a look of defeat. "Lead the way. But fair warning, I'm not great at following orders." As they trudged through the knee-deep snow, he kept a careful distance, studying the way she moved. Fluid, powerful, every step exuding a predator's grace. His suit sensors picked up something curious. She radiated a surprising amount of body heat, far more than any human would. Another mystery for another time. For now, he had bigger concerns, like figuring out exactly how he was going to get out of this mess. "I must admit," Aurelia said after several minutes of trudging through the snow, her breath barely visible in the freezing air, "you are not what I expected from the reports of human males." Will arched an eyebrow. "Oh, and what exactly were you expecting? Smaller, weaker, more primitive?" She cast him a long, assessing glance. "The data suggested your species was barely worth considering as a conquest." Will let out a low chuckle. "Sounds like your intelligence division needs an upgrade." Aurelia's lips quirked slightly, though whether in amusement or skepticism, he couldn't tell. Humans seemed to be full of surprises. They reached what appeared to be a sheer rock face, an impassable wall of stone. But at the lightest touch of Aurelia's hand, a concealed door slid open with a smooth, mechanical hiss. "Though I still find it difficult to believe your kind could ever pose a real challenge to the Solarian Empire," she continued as she stepped inside. "The very idea of breeding with a human male is laughable." "Funny you should bring that up," Will started, only to be cut off by a sudden, thunderous explosion. The mountainside trembled violently. Chunks of rock and ice broke loose from above, crashing toward them in a deadly avalanche. Without thinking, Will lunged forward, grabbing Aurelia and tackling her through the doorway, just as the entrance caved in behind them, sealing them inside. They landed hard, an undignified tangle of limbs. Will, clad in his armored suit, found himself sprawled over her significantly taller frame. For a moment, neither of them spoke, their breaths mingling in the stillness, the emergency lighting flickering to life and bathing everything in a soft amber glow. "Well," Will finally said, still not moving. "Looks like we'll have plenty of time to discuss interspecies relations." Aurelia exhaled sharply, whether in irritation or amusement, he wasn't sure. Rising to her feet with effortless grace, she surveyed their surroundings. The emergency lighting cast warm highlights across her striking features as she moved with deliberate precision through the command center, her impressive height forcing her to duck beneath lower ceiling panels. "The communications array is damaged," she announced, frustration evident in her deep, resonant voice. "We are completely cut off from the outside." Will leaned casually against a console, crossing his arms. "Could be worse," he mused. "At least we've got life support and climate control." He tapped the readout on his armor's forearm display. "Environmental systems are stable, and I'm picking up enough stored power to last for weeks." Aurelia turned to face him, golden eyes gleaming in the dim light. "You seem remarkably unconcerned for someone trapped with a potentially hostile alien queen." "Potentially hostile. So that's an improvement from earlier," Will remarked with a grin. "Besides, I've been in worse situations. Usually with less interesting company." That sound again, half scoff, half something dangerously close to laughter. "You humans and your ceaseless attempts at charm," she muttered. "Is it working? Don't be ridiculous." But there was a subtle shift in her tone, a flicker of something unspoken. She took a step closer, the soft hum of her armor plates shifting as she moved. Though Will was no small man, she still towered over him, a figure of both power and elegance. "I must admit, you are intriguing," she said at last. "Most species cower before the Solarian Empire." Will straightened up slightly, closing the distance just enough to match her intensity. "Maybe they never took the time to get to know you." Her gaze sharpened. "And you wish to?" "Well, considering we're stuck here together, we might as well make the best of it," he said smoothly. He gestured to his armor. "This suit has some pretty advanced scanning capabilities. Want to know what it tells me about Solarian physiology?" Her eyes narrowed in suspicion. "You dare to scan me?" "Standard protocol," he replied innocently. "For example, I know your core temperature runs about 15 degrees hotter than mine. Your heart actually beats in a fascinating double rhythm. And," he tilted his head slightly, lips quirking, "your pheromone levels spike whenever you get close to me." Aurelia's vibrant orange skin darkened, a subtle but unmistakable flush. "You are insufferably presumptuous for a prisoner," she said, her voice measured but laced with something else. "Prisoner? Are we still calling it that?" Will asked, smirking. "Feels more like we're reluctant roommates at this point." She took another step forward until she was mere inches away, looming over him, eyes gleaming with a dangerous intensity. "Perhaps I should remind you of your position," she murmured. "From where I'm standing, my position's not bad," Will countered, unwavering. "Though I'm open to suggestions for improvement." A low, throaty growl rumbled from her, less a warning and more an unspoken challenge. "You play a dangerous game, human." "Will," he corrected smoothly. "And I'm not playing." Something shifted between them, an unspoken charge in the air, crackling like static electricity, though it had nothing to do with the failing outpost systems. Aurelia's hand lifted, her fingers surprisingly soft as they traced the cut above Will's eye. "Your species is so fragile," she murmured, studying him with something bordering on curiosity. "So short-lived compared to mine." "And yet," Will said, holding her gaze, "you don't scare me. You should be afraid." But she didn't move away. "This is madness," she continued, as though trying to convince herself. "The very idea of interaction between our species." Will reached up, brushing a strand of copper-colored hair from her face with his armored fingers. "Sometimes," he murmured, "madness is the only thing that makes sense." The kiss, when it finally came, was like touching a live wire. Her skin was impossibly hot against his, alien yet intoxicating. Time unraveled around them, boundaries dissolving, until nothing else existed except the space they occupied together. Much later, as they lay together in what passed for a rest chamber, their bodies cooling in the artificial atmosphere, Will traced idle patterns across her warm, orange-hued skin. It shimmered under his touch, fascinating him anew. "Still think the idea of breeding with a human is laughable?" he asked, unable to hide the smirk in his voice. Aurelia propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him with an expression caught between amusement and something deeper. "You may have altered my perspective on certain matters," she admitted. "Happy to expand your horizons," Will teased. She rolled her eyes, a surprisingly human gesture. "Your ego is insufferable. Part of my charm." Her expression sobered slightly. "This changes nothing," she said, though the conviction in her voice wavered. "When we're rescued, if we're rescued, this remains a secret." She hesitated. "Though, perhaps further cultural exchange would be beneficial while we wait." Will grinned. "For science, of course." "For science," she agreed, her lips curving slightly, just before the ground shuddered beneath them. Warning lights flashed as an ominous rumble echoed through the outpost. System alerts scrolled rapidly across the monitors. "That's not good," Will muttered, already reaching for his armor. Aurelia was already in motion, her warrior instincts taking over. The explosion must have destabilized the mountain. Another tremor hit, stronger this time. Equipment crashed to the floor, metal groaned under immense pressure, and dust rained from the ceiling as cracks began to spiderweb across it. "Time to go," Will announced, locking his armor into place. "Tell me this place has an emergency exit." "There's a maintenance shaft," Aurelia said, scanning the room. But the ceiling chose that moment to start collapsing. The narrow shaft was a tight fit, even for Will, but for Aurelia's towering frame, it was a near impossible squeeze. He climbed first, his armor's built-in lights cutting through the darkness as they ascended through the mountain's crumbling interior. "Your Majesty," he called back. "Not that I'm complaining about the view, but you've been unusually quiet." "Focus on climbing, human," she shot back, though her voice lacked its usual imperial authority. Instead, it sounded strained. The shaft ended at a heavy hatch. Will braced himself, engaging his armor's servos to push against the sealed door. Metal groaned in protest before finally giving way with a sharp hiss of pressurized air. A blast of ice-cold wind and snow hit them as they emerged onto the mountainside. The storm had worsened, turning the landscape into an endless, blinding white. Will's suit readout flashed an alert, temperature drop detected. Then he noticed something else. Aurelia was shivering violently. "This isn't right," she murmured, wrapping her arms around herself. Her body trembled, her golden eyes flickering with something dangerously close to fear. "Solarians don't. We don't feel cold like this." Will's suit automatically scanned Aurelia's vitals, flashing an urgent warning. "Your core temperature is fluctuating dangerously. We need to find shelter now." He quickly surveyed the terrain and spotted a rocky outcrop that might provide some protection. Wrapping an arm around Aurelia, he steadied her as they moved, keenly aware of how she leaned into him. The disparity in their heights was evident, but she didn't resist his support. The moment they stepped inside the cave, he activated his armor's emergency beacon and began setting up a temporary camp, retrieving essential supplies from his survival kit. "Will?" Aurelia's voice held an uncertainty he'd never heard before. "Something's changing." He turned toward her, watching as she stared at her own hand in bewilderment. Her orange skin shimmered, pulsing with an eerie internal glow. His suit's sensors flickered erratically, unable to make sense of the data. "What exactly are you feeling?" He stepped closer, voice steady despite his concern. "Everything is amplified." She blinked rapidly, as if overwhelmed. "Colors, sensations, everything is sharper, more intense." Her golden eyes gleamed with an unnatural radiance. Then she hesitated, pressing a hand against her abdomen. "And there's something else, something growing." A sharp beep from Will's suit interrupted the moment. His breath caught as he read the results. "Aurelia, you're pregnant." She exhaled sharply, emotions flickering across her features. Shock, wonder, disbelief. "That's impossible. Our species aren't meant to be compatible. Guess nobody told our DNA that." Will reached for her hand, and without hesitation, she laced her fingers with his. A sudden, genuine laugh escaped her. Not the measured, calculated one he'd come to expect from the regal warrior, but something freer. I'm carrying the first recorded human-Solarian hybrid, she mused. The council will lose their minds. The genetic purists will call for my abdication. And yet, she trailed her fingers over his armor, her expression unreadable. I find myself intrigued by the possibilities. You're not mad? He asked cautiously. Aurelia smirked, revealing slightly elongated canines. For generations, my kind believed ourselves superior to all other species. And in a single night, you proved that humans are not only our equals, but potential mates. She tilted her head, her gaze searching his. Do you realize what this means? That I'm about to become public enemy number one in the Solarian Empire? That, and so much more. The glint in her eyes turned predatory. It means evolution. Change. A future neither of our people ever conceived. The cave suddenly felt much smaller. Will's suit notified him of an increase in Aurelia's pheromone levels, her vitals stabilizing. He cleared his throat, attempting to keep his focus. We should run tests. Make sure everything is safe. Aurelia leaned in, amusement dancing across her features. Very thorough tests. Before Will could respond, a deafening explosion rattled the ground. His tactical display flared to life, detecting multiple incoming hostiles. We've got company, he muttered, scanning the interference from the storm. At least 3 ships, likely more cloaked by the blizzard. Aurelia's playful demeanor vanished, replaced by the regal authority of a queen. They must have tracked the outpost's collapse. She squared her shoulders, appearing every inch a ruler despite the disarray of their situation. We cannot be found together. Not yet. Not until I control the narrative. I'm not leaving you. You must. She placed her palms on either side of his face, golden eyes burning into his. My people won't harm their queen, but they will kill you without hesitation. Another explosion, closer this time, sent snow and rock cascading from above. Searchlights cut through the storm, sweeping toward the cave. There's a human settlement 2 days south, she instructed swiftly. Find them. I will reach out when it's safe. How? She pressed something cool into his palm. A crystal, pulsing faintly with the same inner light as her skin. This will guide you back to me. Now go. Will hesitated for only a second before pulling her into a fierce kiss. This isn't goodbye. No, she whispered, shoving him toward the cave's rear exit. This is only the beginning. Activating his suit's stealth mode, Will slipped into the storm just as the search party reached the cave. The last thing he heard was Aurelia's commanding voice berating her guards for their delayed arrival. As the blizzard swallowed him, he tightened his grip on the glowing crystal. A smirk pulled at his lips. That's one way to strengthen human-alien relations. 2 grueling days of traversing the unforgiving terrain did little to dampen Will's spirits. The crystal remained warm against his chest, and his suit continued to relay steady biosigns from Aurelia and their improbable child. Finally, he crested a ridge. Below lay New Darwin, a sprawling human settlement with prefab structures and defense towers. On the surface, it looked like any other frontier colony, except for one glaring difference. They were preparing for war. Shit, Will muttered as his tactical display flagged armored vehicles patrolling the perimeter. Further scans highlighted planetary defense batteries being installed. Before he could process the implications, his presence triggered the colony's security. A squad of soldiers in powered armor surrounded him within minutes, weapons trained. A familiar voice broke through the tension. Commander Watson. Will turned toward the source. Colonel Sarah Hayes stepped forward, her lined face betraying a rare flicker of relief. You were reported dead, she said, scanning him with suspicion. The Hyperion logged your shuttle crash in Solarian territory 3 days ago. Nice to see you too, Colonel. He nodded toward the growing military presence. Mind telling me why it looks like you're preparing for a planetary invasion? Her expression darkened. Let's talk inside. You're not going to like what I have to tell you. The command center was a flurry of activity. Holodisplays mapped out strategic movements, both human and Solarian. Analysts pored over intelligence reports, the tension in the air palpable. The Solarian Empire is in chaos, Hayes explained grimly, pulling up classified footage. Their queen disappeared 3 days ago, coincidentally, the exact moment you crashed. Will schooled his expression into neutrality. And they're mobilizing for war. Our intel suggests a coup is underway. Will exhaled slowly. Any idea what happened to the queen? Hayes's gaze narrowed. That's where things get interesting. Hayes activated the playback of an intercepted Solarian broadcast, their voices laced with tension. She's carrying a child. The genetic purists are calling it an abomination, but listen to this. A rising faction within their own military stands with her. They believe it's the next stage of evolution. You don't say? Will muttered. The real threat is this man. Hayes continued as the screen shifted to display a towering Solarian male adorned in elaborate battle armor. That's High Commander Pyrex. He's convinced the Queen's pregnancy is proof of human sabotage, claiming it as biological warfare. Will gave a low whistle. That's quite the conspiracy. And he's using it as justification for an offensive against human colonies. Hence, our current mobilization. Before Will could formulate a response, sirens blared across the base. A junior officer rushed in, eyes wide with alarm. Colonel, multiple ships have entered orbit. It's the Solarian Royal Guard. Hayes snatched her command helmet, barking orders. Battle stations, all units. Wait. Will raised a hand, halting her. Let me speak to them first. Are you insane? She snapped. The main display flickered to life, revealing Queen Aurelia adorned in her full regalia. Her radiant orange skin shimmered with an inner glow, her presence commanding even through the screen. People of New Darwin, she announced. I am Queen Aurelia of the Solarian Empire. I seek asylum. The control room exploded into chaos. Analysts scrambled to confirm the transmission, while Hayes shouted for verification. Will, however, simply smiled, feeling the crystal at his chest thrum and sync with his heartbeat. Aurelia's gaze locked onto him through the screen. Commander Watson, I believe we have much to discuss. Ignoring Hayes's protests, Will stepped forward. Your Majesty, I trust you're in good health. Better by the day, she said, a knowing smile gracing her lips, one that caused several officers to blush. Though I find myself missing our scientific debates. Before anyone could process the implications, proximity alarms screamed. More ships appeared in orbit, their hulls bearing the colors of Pyrex. A new voice boomed across the comms. My dear Queen, how convenient to find you alongside the very humans who have corrupted you. Aurelia's expression hardened. The only corruption here is your antiquated ideals, Pyrex. Stand down. He smirked. The council has spoken. You will be purged. The abomination will be eradicated, and these human vermin eliminated. Will stepped closer to the display, crossing his arms. Hey, tall, dark, and fascist. That's my abomination you're talking about. A stunned silence settled over the comms. Hayes groaned, burying her face in her hands. Pyrex looked as if he had been physically struck. Then, breaking the tension, Aurelia's laughter rang out, rich and genuine. Well, my love, she mused. I suppose that's one way to make an announcement. Pyrex's face contorted with rage. You dare. Oh, I dare a lot of things. Will's grin was razor-sharp, including knocking up your queen. Turns out, humans and Solarians aren't as different as you thought. This is impossible. Clearly not. Aurelia placed a protective hand over her midsection. Our child represents everything you fear. Pyrex, change, evolution, the end of your delusions of genetic purity. Her golden eyes glowed with a fire that rivaled the stars. And do you know what else? Half the fleet supports me. How many ships do you command again? As if to emphasize her point, new signatures appeared on tactical readouts, Solarian warships emerging from hyperspace, their hulls emblazoned with the Queen's insignia. Will raised a brow. Last chance, Pyrex. Stand down, or learn firsthand why humans have a reputation for being a pain in the ass. The silence stretched, tension thick enough to cut with a blade. Then, Pyrex's forces powered up their weapons. So be it, he snarled. Aurelia exhaled, as if already weary of the inevitable. Commander Watson, she said, shall we handle this rebellion together? Will cracked his knuckles. Thought you'd never ask, Your Majesty. The battle above New Darwin unfolded in a symphony of destruction. Pyrex's forces fought with the zeal of extremists, but they hadn't accounted for the fusion of human ingenuity with Solarian power. On the bridge of the Imperial Dawn, Will orchestrated maneuvers that defied conventional tactics, his suit seamlessly linked to the Solarian systems, aided, he suspected, by his deepening connection with Aurelia. Your tactics are unconventional, Aurelia observed, watching him reconfigure battle formations in ways that made her veteran strategists recoil in disbelief. Humans excel at improvisation, he replied, fingers dancing over the controls. Speaking of which, incoming. Pyrex's flagship launched a barrage of plasma torpedoes. Before the Solarian gunners could react, Will rerouted defensive energy fields to redirect the assault back at its source. Impressive, Aurelia admitted, then abruptly gasped, gripping her abdomen. Will was at her side instantly. What's wrong? Her eyes widened in awe. The child. It's developing far faster than expected. Our combined genetics have accelerated the process. A medical officer rushed forward, scanning her. The rate of growth is exponential. We're looking at hours instead of months. Aurelia steadied herself, smiling through the revelation. Impatient, just like their father. Before Will could respond, alarms blared again. Pyrex had breached the ship's defenses and was advancing towards the medical bay. Aurelia gripped Will's arm with inhuman strength. Go. Stop him. Protect our child. I'm not leaving you. You're not, she reassured, pressing the pulsing crystal into his palm. We're connected now. Explosions rocked the ship as Pyrex's forces neared. Will kissed Aurelia deeply before stepping away. Hold that thought, Your Majesty. I've got a pest to exterminate. The corridors were a war zone. Will sealed the medical bay, activating his combat protocols. His crystal pulsed in sync with the ship, amplifying his neural interface. Attention, all hands, he broadcast. We have uninvited guests trying to crash a very special delivery. Let's give them a proper welcome. The crew, both human and Solarian, responded instantly. Pyrex's troops found themselves ensnared in a relentless assault, their formations collapsing under the unorthodox tactics of their opponents. You are delaying the inevitable, Pyrex bellowed over comms. Funny, Will mused, setting up a last-minute ambush. I was about to say the same thing. At that moment, the medical bay doors burst open in a blinding explosion of energy. Aurelia's labor had triggered an event unlike anything recorded. The sheer force sent shockwaves through the ship, rendering Pyrex's armor useless. In the aftermath, Aurelia cradled their newborn, an ethereal child glowing with radiant energy. Pyrex fell to his knees, his voice barely above a whisper. Impossible. Aurelia smiled. You keep using that word, Pyrex. I don't think it means what you think it means. The future had arrived, and it was just getting started.